Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive with Dr. Rebecca Risk. Do you ever feel that even though nothing seems seriously wrong and you pass all the medical tests, that you still feel that your health, pain, and fatigue are completely out of control? It doesn't have to be that way. Listen to the tips and suggestions given on our program today and take back control of your health. Now, here is Dr. Rebecca Risk.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Jen Gunter. She is an obstetrician and gynecologist with nearly 3 decades of experience as a vulvar and vaginal diseases expert. Today, we're discussing her book, The Vagina Bible, The Vulva and the Vagina, Separating the Myth from the Medicine. So, Dr. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what inspired you to put this book together?
Well, I'd been debunking myths online for some time at the point when I decided to write the book, maybe, 6 years. And I'd been writing for different outlets and thinking, gosh, I must be everywhere. How do people not know all this stuff? And I had a day in the office where I saw about 5 women in a row who all had myths and misconceptions about their bodies. So maybe they heard it from their mom or a doctor or a dude or a friend or read it online or a magazine. And each time, when I corrected them and explained what was really going on or what the real medical treatment would be, each one of them said, how did I not know that? How did I not know that? And I sort of sat there and thought, how did you not know that? How did you not know that? How is this possible? We live in this day and age where every single person has a pocket computer with them. They carry the library of all things with them, and yet we can't get the right information out there. And so I just thought a lot about that communication gap, and I thought about all the predators online and the misinformation and the bias and the advertising, and I thought, women need a textbook, and I'm going to write it. And so I did.
Well, good for you. It's actually quite interesting. I didn't plan this, but last week I interviewed Jennifer Block about her book, Why Healthcare Needs a Feminist Revolution. And it's not something you specifically mentioned, not that I caught anyway, but what I'm gathering from all these shows that I've done is that we don't have the information that we need about our bodies. It's lacking in science. It's lacking in knowledge for ourselves. We're not taught things. And we definitely need to bring that forward and have more understanding about what happens, because I think we don't know, or we the layperson.
Yeah, I'll push back a little. I think that in medicine we know most of it. Certainly we don't know what we don't know. But I think that there's a big communication gap between what is medically important for everybody to know, and how to get that knowledge out to people. So that I think is important. I think I'm a runner, and I always think, man, if I understood more how my knee works, and more about, knee pain, and more about the way an orthopedic surgeon knows about the knee, would that make me a better runner? So I do think that we have these gaps in so many areas of medicine. It's not just about the vagina and vulva. However, when then you add in sort of societal shame about talking about the reproductive tract, about societal shame about sex, that even makes it harder. And the other thing, too, is it makes it more vulnerable for predators to step in, right? So if medicine is not taking the lead and having these conversations because they're afraid to talk about sex for some reason, which I don't understand why, then it should not surprise us that other people who don't have good agendas have stepped in to pick up the slack. And so I think the biggest issue is communication.
Well, I know when I was in school and I studied biochem, and then I read a book by Tony Weschler about how our bodies work. I actually learned things in that book I didn't learn in school. Just how I think putting it together with the rhythm of how my body worked was something I was never taught in any class. And that may have changed now. This is a long time ago, but I felt like there was a gap missing, and I had my friends read the book just so that, and they were as amazed as I was, because we didn't know that, our cervical mucus was supposed to be a certain way, and we didn't understand those things. And I think that should be, part of like the grade 6 sex ed class that I had, or maybe it was, I don't remember, but I certainly wasn't as aware of it at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think though that, the general workings of your body is really an educational thing, and that is something that schools should be doing a better job at, or teaching biology in schools. So much of what we teach sort of sex-wise is simply focusing on pregnancy prevention, right, or STD prevention, and it's not focusing on, how things work and why they work a certain way. And then certainly, when you're studying a subject in class, they're not talking about, these things for your body. They're talking about it for, how we're going to learn to study or to advance science. But certainly, I mean, when I was, sitting in my medical school classes, I'd be like, oh, wow, that's how that works. Oh, wow, that's how that works. And so, so the information is very interesting, and there are many people who want to know about it, and there's also people who don't. So, making it available, though, I think is definitely should be a requirement. I think that people are always helped with factual information. There's never a time where facts are bad.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Now, the first chapter in your book, right at the beginning, you're talking about the female anatomy. Is this something that you find is necessary for you to educate your patients on, or do women tend to understand what's going on down there?
No, we absolutely need it. I mean, I have patients come in every single day who say they have a vaginal itch, and what they mean is their vulva itches. This inability to sort of describe anatomy parts correctly is, again, directly related to not educating people about their parts. And I think it's really important for people to know exactly what contributes to what from a sexual pleasure standpoint, from a pain standpoint, so then they're able to have the words to communicate if they have a problem. I mean, not knowing that your clitoris is a super large structure underneath the skin might lead women then to not know why, for example, being touched somewhere gives them pleasure, and they would want to understand that, or it might give them ideas to experiment with more things.
So, do you think that sometimes that misunderstanding can also lead to a misdiagnosis? Because if you say you have a vaginal itch, you might get diagnosed with a yeast infection without an exam, which does happen. So do you think people might end up taking medication they don't need, or with a diagnosis that doesn't suit them just because of that?
Yeah, that happens all the time. Misdiagnosis is incredibly common because people don't stop and say, so what exactly do you mean? If you tell me that your ear hurts, I need to know, is it on the outside, like where the pinna is? Is it where your ear was pierced? Is it just inside the canal? Is it deep inside? Like, those are all different parts. And if one thing hurts differently, it would make a difference for diagnosis. And that's the same for the vulva and the vagina. They're really different parts. And when women come in and say they have a vaginal itch and they think, and it's really a vulvar itch, what happens is they end up getting misdiagnosed over the phone over and over again, but they also misdiagnose themselves. We know that 50 to 70% of women who self-diagnose as a yeast infection are incorrect. Right? So the information that they have is incorrect. Now, how that happened? Is it because they're mistaking their vulva for their vagina? Is it because so many things cause itch that they're missing out all the other things? It's hard to know, but we do know that diagnosis over the phone for these conditions is highly unreliable, and I'm sure that communication gaps in knowing sort of what's going on where is a part of it.
Well, and I think in Canada, I find sometimes it's about the speed of the appointment as well. And people are often, they'll kind of self-diagnose and the doctor will trust that self-diagnosis. It doesn't happen all the time, but I've heard these stories and that's unfortunate, because I think that should be confirmed, especially before you take an antibiotic or a medication. You should know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's completely unacceptable to diagnose this over the phone. People have tried for years to develop telephone triage for diagnosing yeast infections, and it has not been successful, as opposed to urinary tract infections, where we have really highly reliable telephone triage. If you call in and tell me that you have acute onset of needing to go to the bathroom all the time, that when you go you have a hard time getting your stream started, it hurts like crazy when you're emptying your bladder, and you're peeing blood, chances are you got a bladder infection. But we don't have that kind of telephone triage for yeast infections. And I believe that it's dismissed because it's considered a minor woman's problem. And what's the harm of treating over the phone, or what's the harm of using it over the counter? But there is a lot of harm. We have a huge rise in antifungal resistant yeast. Every week I see a woman who has an almost untreatable form of yeast in her vagina, and we have to concoct some completely non-formulary option to treat this yeast. And 25 years ago, I never saw these strains. So we have the same issue that we have with antibiotic resistance with antifungals.
Yeah, exactly. So can you tell us what the vagina and the vulva are?
Sure. So the vagina is the tube on the inside that connects your cervix with the outside world. And the vulva is the part on the outside where your clothes touch the skin, and the part where the two sort of overlap, because the cells from the vagina transition and eventually gradually become the cells of the vulva. So in the area where the cells are kind of partly vaginal and kind of partly vulvar is called the vestibule. And the great thing about the vulva is it's filled with specialized nerve endings for touch. And then you see some of the clitoris, the glands on the outside of the vulva, and the rest of it's beneath the skin, beneath the labia, and wraps around the urethra. And I always tell people to think about the clitoris like a butterfly, and there's sort of two parts of the wing on each side that are kind of hanging down, and the head of the butterfly would be the clitoris glands.
And so, the word vulva isn't actually used very often. Do you know why? Most of the time we just say our parts or our vagina. That word isn't even used very often. But vulva, you very rarely hear.
Yeah, in my office we say it all the time. So it depends on where you are. But sure, but nobody ever said vagina in public before the 80s, ever.
Right.
Ever. People would have said down there, even in the doctor's office, women would have got in and non-described their parts. So I think that's a really important thing to understand, that when we're sort of saying, well, why can't we say the word vulva? I was in my 20s and people couldn't say the word vagina in public. You couldn't say it on television. The vagina monologues was revolutionary because people couldn't say that word. Even on some of the morning shows, it's hard to say the word vagina. So, it's not just in medicine. It's everywhere with all of society. And somehow finally people got okay with vagina. But we have these horrible euphemisms because of this sort of patriarchal sort of society. It's everywhere, not just medicine, that prevents people from talking about their normal anatomy. The story from Grey's Anatomy is, there was an episode where someone was delivering. I don't watch the show, but I've read about, this part of the episode. And, one of the characters having a baby, wanted to yell, "Stop looking at my vagina." And the sort of the producer, or not the producers, but the people at the, who ran that channel or whatever, decided the word vagina had been used too much in the episode and needed another word. And that's how, vajayjay came about. And so, if you're talking about the vagina, you need to say the vagina by how many times you say it. No one would make someone come up with a euphemism for the elbow. Mm-hmm. And so it's this idea that it's dirty in our culture to say the words vagina, and it's not, or vulva. And so that's why, I was really insistent on having both the words, on the front of the book.
Yeah, definitely. I want to touch on the subject, but we're not going to have time for the break, so we'll get into that. We are going to take a quick break. We're talking today with Dr. Jen Gunter, and we're discussing her book, The Vagina Bible. We'll be back shortly.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
A stain-free clean home is something to be proud about, but it's hard to maintain when you're using cleaning products that don't work well or take forever to use. Q Carbona, a household brand that has turned their decades of cleaning experience into products that get the job done fully, quickly, and easily. When I first heard about Stain Devils, my stain removing game was changed. Think about this. If you have a chocolate stain, it doesn't make sense to treat it with a formula that removes wine because they are chemically different. Knowing this, Carbona created specific stain removers for specific stain types. Genius, right? Beyond stain removers, they have highly efficient products for your laundry, carpets, and washing machine. My co-host Oliver, who is a Chihuahua Cross, wants to remind you not to forget about the pet stain and odor remover. Want to start living your life unstained? Shop Carbona.com with code FTTC for 20% off your order. Happy cleaning!
Have you friended us on Facebook yet? Why not? Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for the keywords Voice America. Once you are part of our Facebook network, you'll receive daily messages about what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and new happenings at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. And you can add your voice to the always active discussions on our timeline. Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for Voice America.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
A stain-free clean home is something to be proud about, but it's hard to maintain when you're using cleaning products that don't work well or take forever to use. Carbona, a household brand that has turned their decades of cleaning experience into products that get the job done fully, quickly, and easily. When I first heard about Stain Devils, my stain removing game was changed. Think about this. If you have a chocolate stain, it doesn't make sense to treat it with a formula that removes wine because they are chemically different. Knowing this, Carbona created specific stain removers for specific stain types. Genius, right? Beyond stain removers, they have highly efficient products for your laundry, carpets, and washing machine. My co-host Oliver, who is a Chihuahua Cross, wants to remind you not to forget about the pet stain and odor remover. Want to start living your life unstained? Shop Carbona.com with code FTTC for 20% off your order. Happy cleaning! Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Dr. Jen Gunter about her book, The Vagina Bible. So you were kind of getting there, and I wanted to give us time to talk about this. One thing that you talk about in your book is vaginal shaming. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think we have a pretty significant culture of both vaginal and vulvar shame. I mean, vaginal shame is all about women being told they need to prep or clean their vagina, usually for men. And that's why we have all these douches and wipes, intimate wipes. I mean, it fascinates me that we sell, because I don't do it, but that companies sell wipes for women's vulvas and anuses, but no one seems to care about wiping the scrotums and anuses of men. So that's men are not shamed in that same way, that this idea that their parts are dirty or toxic. So that's been around since pretty much the beginning of time. But we also have some new players in the market. So the wellness industry is certainly in on that. Promoting something like vaginal steaming is simply also telling women to be ashamed of their parts. They need to be cleaned. It's wrapped up with a different message, but the same core harm is there. And then we have this rise of cosmetic surgery on the labia. I see young women on a regular basis now worried about how their labia look. And 20 years ago, that never happened, ever. This is really such a new thing, and I think it's really tied to sort of plastic surgeons advertising it and many women's magazines talking about it. Young girls now say that they have an outie vagina if their labia minora are longer than their labia majora, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, half of women are built that way. That's nothing to do. It has something to do with your vagina. It's your labia. But yet they feel shamed. They feel shamed that their labia, something that's part of their sexual response cycle, is large. But we don't shame men that way. Can you think about a culture that would shame men for having a big package in their jeans? I don't think so.
No, it's funny. It's funny how we do this, and I wonder where they're even getting this shame from, because it's not talked about on TV, and perhaps social media, and just something that I've missed because I think I'm too old for a lot of the social media. But they've got to have that feeling coming from somewhere that to feel that way.
Well, I've thought a lot about it, and there was actually a study last year which from plastic surgeons who felt that the pressure was from the look in yoga pants, that women could see the outline of their labia in yoga pants. And I don't think that's correct, because when I was a teen in high school in the 80s, we all wore jeans that I can only describe as being painted on. That was the trend. Like you had to lie down on your bed to get them zipped up. You could not breathe. And it was so uncomfortable. It was ridiculous. Yeah. And you could see people's, and I like to call it labial cleavage because camel toe is pejorative. It's labial cleavage. Love it. You could see your labial cleavage in jeans, and no one was worried about getting them trimmed so it looked sleeker. Like, that didn't enter anybody's mind. In fact, I'm pretty sure we dressed that way to show people, right? So I think that it's this messaging that you should be that you should be ashamed if that's how you look. That's the difference. We didn't feel shame for dressing like that then, and now women, for some reason, they're told. Someone has decided they can make money off of telling women that their vulvas are quote quote not perfect. So I just think that we have this industry now.
Yeah, and not only are we somehow getting this before we go to the surgeon's office, but there's surgeons who are giving into this as well and doing this surgery, even though it's not necessary. I mean, it's cosmetic, and I suppose we do this to our noses and other things, but it's feeding into that feeling as well.
Yeah, but if having your nose altered cosmetically changed the way you smell things, we'd be having different conversations, right? But that's part of your so your labia are part of your sexual response, so that's different, right? And if a nose job involved changing the part that actually smelled, I don't think we'd be advertising them in the same way. Right? I would like to think it would be different. So, then what is the messaging that we're telling women that the part of their body that gives them sexual pleasure should be smaller? But that's what's culturally or socially attractive. I mean, that's problematic. And that men and young boys make fun of women for how they look for that way. It's like, if your sexual partner is making fun of your body parts that give you sexual pleasure, they shouldn't be your sexual partner. Like, that's it. They're a horrible person. But for some reason, this is the messaging young girls are now getting from young boys. And my personal belief is that, because, like 90% of women have been told negative things, young girls now have been told negative things about their vulvas from male partners, that I think that every image that we see online of a naked or semi-naked body has a very small labia. And this isn't just porn. This is Sports Illustrated. This is shows. This is, like I see advertisements for underwear, and I think I can get my labia. Who can get their labia in that? So it's everywhere. It's every image looks like that. That's just like every image is of somebody who's a size 2, or almost every image. So for some reason, advertisers have decided that's what sells. And in the 80s, we didn't see pictures of naked people around everywhere. So nobody was sort of paying attention to it. It was really uncommon. And now the images are everywhere. So I believe that's a big part of it.
It's really interesting. Now, I think we can also segue into your comments about shaving and care down there. I found that really interesting because actually nobody talks about it, and not in my circle anyway. And so can you just tell us a little bit about how you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, nobody talks about it, but a lot of people are doing it. So yeah, I mean, it's a body modification. So what's really disheartening is I will have women, and I'll explain to them about their pubic hair, and they look at me with disgust, like there's something dirty, like they assign the word dirty to their pubic hair. You would never assign the word dirty to your eyebrows. right? But they both serve a biological function. Your eyebrows keep sweat out of your eyes, and your pubic hair is a protective barrier for your vulva. It also probably maintains the humidity in the area. And it may be involved in sexual pleasure because tugging on it pulls on nerve endings. So, if dabbing and removing pubic hair has risks associated with it, risks of injury, risks of burns, risks of ingrown hairs, and there's a a little bit more than theoretical chance of increasing your risk of getting a viral STD because, it's trauma to your skin, hair removal. So it makes sense if you have fresh trauma and you're exposed to a viral STD that you'd be more likely to catch it. Makes total sense. So if with that in mind, you decide that you want to remove your pubic hair, it's your body, it's your choice. But that's an informed decision. An uninformed decision is thinking your pubic hair is dirty and should come off, right? And I think about that. I mean, I have a son who wants to get his ear pierced. And so we've gone through, what are the risks? What are the benefits? How are you going to care for it? How are you going to feel if you have a complication, even though it's rare? And then once you've thought about all those things, then we'll go ahead and do it. And it's really interesting we looked up all the, and the risks low. I mean, lots of people get their ears pierced without any problems. But once I actually made him think about the risks, even if they're low, he thought, I need to think about that a little bit more. And that's informed consent.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wonder if part of that comes from the idea that it's dirty because don't they shave women when they give birth? And so that's an idea that has to be clean in that area.
Yeah, I mean, pubic hair removal has a very complex history. I mean, absolutely, there was a time when doctors recommended shaving because we thought that hair was dirty and would increase infections. However, we also now know that shaving actually increases infection. So it's very harmful in surgery to remove hair beforehand. So that's why we don't do it anywhere in surgery. So there's certainly medicine has contributed to it, but historically, pubic hair has also been was a sign of public nudity. So, in the States and, places that wanted to have, strip clubs and things like that, as long as you didn't show pubic hair, in the 50s and 60s, you weren't nude. So how can you show more and more skin? By removing pubic hair. Right. So there's a way to get around sort of purity laws. And then if you go way back, people used to shave their pubic hair because of pubic lice. So, 1400s, 1500s, when lice was a big issue, people would shave their pubic hair. But the problem is, once you shave your pubic hair, now people can see your syphilis ulcers. So that's why they had merkins.
Yeah, okay. So it didn't work back then very well.
But then now you see how that's like, if the only way to treat pubic lice, which sounds dirty, and we should never shame people for having a sexually transmitted infection. We don't shame people for getting influenza. People don't catch and give STDs on purpose. But you can see if removing pubic hair was historically linked with preventing a disease, you could see how then you would think that pubic hair is dirty, right? So, so there's a very complex, fascinating history, but yeah, and then also people wore merkins because you didn't want people to think that you had lice and had to shave your pubic hair.
Yeah. For sure. So,
very complex.
One thing you mentioned in the first segment was that, people don't talk about sex a lot. Doctors don't talk about sex a lot. And I think that there is a lot to talk about. There's whether it hurts, if it's not the right fit, or if there is something going wrong, people are ashamed or embarrassed to talk about it. So how do you approach that with your patients?
Well, I mean, all I do are talk about sex or pain with sex all day because that's my area of specialty. So, I talk about it frankly, and I think that the number one thing I wish that all women knew was that sex shouldn't be painful. There's so much mythology in there. So first of all, everybody thinks that first sex is supposed to be painful. You hear that a lot of time. Women are very afraid they're gonna, sex is gonna hurt, and they're gonna bleed. 2/3 of women have zero pain with their first penile penetration. 2/3, and of the remaining third, only half of them have significant pain. Most of them it's very mild, which is about the same incidence of women who have pain with sex. So meaning if your first episode of, sex is very painful, either it was technically terrible, meaning your partner didn't invest in any foreplay, because if you have no foreplay, chances are sex might be painful, or you have a pain with sex condition. And so I think what's happened because of this false belief that first sex is painful, and because people can't talk about sex, so many doctors just assume that, you just need to keep doing it so it doesn't hurt. And that's not how it works. If sex is painful, it's a medical condition, and you need to see someone to get a diagnosis.
I'm glad you're saying that. I've done a few shows with about this topic or with this topic in it, and I know that there are a lot of doctors that don't say what you say and don't believe the women, maybe think that they want to get out of it, and that kind of mythology, because that's what I believe it is kind of put on women, and our health isn't always taken seriously in all instances.
Well, I think that the core root for most of that is the inability to have a frank discussion about sex. So, there certainly actually are times where I'll talk to someone and we'll go through everything with pain with sex or libido issues, and then someone tells me that they hate their partner. Well, that's a problem, because you're not going to have good sex with somebody you hate. But if you can't talk about everything and say, okay, so what's happening with your foreplay? What's happening? You can't walk through all of those things. If you've never had foreplay, if you've only been with this one person, and his idea of foreplay is twist the nipple and stick it in, you don't have a pain with sex problem. You have a mechanics of sex problem, right? You got to fix that, because you need to have more than that to have good sex. So if you can't frankly talk about all of the steps that are happening in the sex, you can't make the diagnosis. Is there a nerve pain condition? Is there a skin condition? Is there a mechanics of sex condition? Is there a whole libido, this is the wrong person for you thing? Because that happens sometimes too. And sometimes it's a complex mix of some of those things. But if you don't sort of talk about all of those things, you're never going to get to the answer. So for the majority of people, I would say it's a medical condition. A small percentage is definitely a mechanics issue, that the way that they are having sex would, if you're literally getting 5 seconds of foreplay and your partner's expecting that he can just put his erect penis in straight away without any touching, anything going on, yes, you will probably have pain with sex. It will probably not be enjoyable, and you would not want to have sex like that. So, you have to have these conversations.
Well, and that's important too, because to just tell a woman, it's just what you're doing, and not dig deeper and find out if they are that small percentage who's actually having pain with sex, and then missing a diagnosis of a condition that's probably controlling their lives in some ways. We need to have those discussions, and I think that you're right. Doctors are afraid to say it, but I also think that patients are afraid to say it. It's very embarrassing to have those conversations, especially if you feel like you're not being listened to.
Well, and I think that because nobody talks about sex problems, everybody thinks they're the only one. So everybody thinks there's something uniquely wrong with them, right? And when I say wrong with them, meaning like they're really wrong, like they're broken like nobody else is. And so that's the other harm of never talking about it. If you grew up, if in sex ed, when you were in grade 7, you learned, just like you might learn in driver's ed, that if you don't wear a seatbelt, you're more likely to die in an accident, and you remember that. So if you learn in sex ed that if the first time you have sex it's super painful, there's a problem, and you should stop and see a doctor, that would save, that's when you need that information. You need that information before you even have sex for the first time, so then you know if there's a problem. If during sex ed you learned that most people need stimulation as part of foreplay to have enjoyable sex, if you're not getting it, you're going to stop that person and say, wait a minute, this isn't how it's supposed to work. Just like you'd stop someone and say, you need to put your seatbelt on. What's going on here?
Well, and I think this is important that you're bringing this up. I mean, I wish we were taught all these things in school. I think there's a fear that, if we teach kids these things, they're going to go and have sex, where in reality, I think that this is information that we need so that our lives aren't going down a rabbit hole that they shouldn't go down. And as you said, if it's painful, you need to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think that science tells us it doesn't. So, but getting people who are against sex education to believe that is about as hard as getting people who are anti-vaccine to believe that vaccines are safe. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So because it's a belief. It's like a religion to them. It's not a scientific, like I'm a scientist. If you prove to me that sex ed was harmful, I would say, whoa, show me the studies. I want to know about that, right? I wouldn't just say, no, put my fingers in my ears. I want the answers. But fortunately, I know that the science says that, sex, quality sex education that covers everything does not encourage kids to have sex. In fact, it actually encourages them to make safer choices, which is what you want to have. I mean, my kids had very high quality sex education in their schools in grade 7. I mean, it was really good. And afterwards I said, so, they're both boys. Are you more interested in sex or are you less interested? And they both said less interested. And not that it turned them off, but a lot of initial sexual experiences are curiosity. And once you have your curiosity satisfied, you're like, oh, I mean, and so what happens is we have young women who learn essentially nothing about their bodies in school. Their parents can't really talk to them about their bodies, and their pediatricians have 12 minutes with them and have to cover everything, right? So who's having these conversations? And then the first time they have sex, whatever, they're 16, 17, 19, 20, whatever age it is. And they don't know much about the mechanics of sex. So who are they learning it from? If they're partnering with a man, they're learning from the least reliable person, a young heterosexual male.
Who had the same sex ed that they did that had nothing in it.
Right, except it's worse because they think their penis is a mighty sword and it should take, 1 minute of penile penetration. And because in the movies, because I do this all the time, every movie, whenever there's a sex scene, I count the seconds from when it looks like there's supposed to be penile penetration to when the woman is arching her back and screaming like she's having an orgasm. It's always 3 seconds, 4 seconds. So that's what they think. The thing about sex in movies, and this is all movies, whether you're looking at porn, Game of Thrones, sex scenes in regular, every single movie, that it's all about this money shot, and it's all about penetration gives orgasm immediately. There's very little focus on foreplay. And what's fascinating is that men seem to think, or a lot of men seem to think that that's documentary filmmaking as opposed to acting.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. I'm talking today with Dr. Jen Gunter, and we'll be back shortly.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
A stain-free clean home is something to be proud about, but it's hard to maintain when you're using cleaning products that don't work well or take forever to use. Q-Carbona, a household brand that has turned their decades of cleaning experience into products that get the job done fully, quickly, and easily. When I first heard about Stain Devils, my stain removing game was changed. Think about this. If you have a chocolate stain, it doesn't make sense to treat it with a formula that removes wine because they are chemically different. Knowing this, Carbona created specific stain removers for specific stain types. Genius, right? Beyond stain removers, they have highly efficient products for your laundry, carpets, and washing machine. My co-host Oliver, who is a Chihuahua Cross, wants to remind you not to forget about the pet stain and odor remover. Want to start living your life unstained? Shop Carbona.com with code FTTC for 20% off your order. Happy cleaning!
Have you friended us on Facebook yet? Why not? Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for the keywords Voice America. Once you are part of our Facebook network, you'll receive daily messages about what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and new happenings at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. And you can add your voice to the always active discussions on our timeline. Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for Voice America.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today I'm talking with Dr. Jen Gunter, and we're discussing her book, The Vagina Bible. So, Dr. Jen, what are some myths that you would like to debunk?
Well, I think, a big one is that the vagina and vulva are dirty and need to be cleaned and prepped in some way, or that they're filled with toxins. The reproductive tract has toxins, and none of that is true. The vagina is a self-cleaning oven. It absolutely needs no cleaning. And your vulva on the outside, the part on the outside, many women manage with just water, but otherwise a facial cleanser, something that is, no fragrance, that's about all you need. A very mild cleanser. You don't want to use anything harsh, and you certainly don't need to use these so-called intimate wipes. So that would be a big one. I think another big myth is that the penis is the most reliable way to induce a female orgasm. And so, yeah, I know, right? So studies tell us that only about 20 to 30% of women will orgasm from penile penetration alone, and that the most reliable way to bring about a female orgasm is actually with your hands, and the second is with your mouth, and the third is with the penis. So, I mean, it's fun to try many things, obviously, and but women and men who partner with women and women who partner with men should know that that this myth that the penis is what should be bringing their orgasm is it's a myth. And if you need a vibrator, totally normal. If you need manual stimulation in other ways, if you need oral stimulation, all totally normal. I think another one is that everybody's having sex all the time. Everything is sold with sex, so you would get that idea. And, then people, when we actually look at surveys, people say that sex is the most important thing in their life. But in reality, people are, having about maybe 6 or 7 minutes of sex a week, which, I probably spend more time looking in my fridge than 6 or 7 minutes. So I think that it's just important to, as long as you're happy with your sex life, that's what matters. You shouldn't be using somebody else's metric for your sex life.
I think that's a really important one, because I think we do that a lot, especially we compare ourselves to other people, we compare ourselves to social media, how we look, what we're doing, and it really, as you said, it's what works for us and what works for our relationship is the important bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, society and pharmaceutical predators and many predators in medicine are very sold on this idea of female horniness, right? And that suits a very narrow sort of male-centric version of what they want female sexuality to be, right? Like, you're virginal until you're incredibly horny for a man, and then you're just horny for him all the time, just at the drop of a hat, horny. Women are horny all the time. And, women's sexual response comes in all different ways, and some women may have, at some points in their life, have high spontaneous desire. At other points in their time, they might not have high spontaneous desire, but they might have very high receptive desire, meaning, I'm using desire and libido interchangeably here. So meaning, their partner sits down and, you're not interested in sex, you're sitting down, but your partner sits down and he sits next to you and he snuggles up next to you, and then, maybe he strokes your arm a little bit, and then you start thinking about the last time he stroked your arm and how nice, what happened afterwards. And so then maybe you start thinking that maybe you would be interested. Some people decide to have sex with their partner because they want to feel close, and then after they start kissing and cuddling, then the physical arousal kicks in. I think it's important for people to know that this sort of high state of female physical arousal, which we sort of label as sort of horniness, is really a societal construct, and we do a lot of disservice to women when we start when we promote that idea, and that's how the pharmaceutical industry gets to sell products, right? That on this sort of false metric of female horniness all the time.
Well, definitely. I think it's more than the pharmaceutical industry selling products based on female horniness and women, but it seems to be widespread in our society. And so are there any other myths out there that you think are important?
I think that another important myth is that, tampons are not toxic. There's this idea that tampons are basically death sticks for your vagina, and they're not. The incidence of toxic shock syndrome is about 1 to 2 per 100,000. It's very low. It's basically like the risk of a lightning strike. So, I'm not saying that risk doesn't exist, but women do far more dangerous things every day than putting a tampon in their vagina, right? Just crossing the street in most major cities is pretty risky. Think about the number of pedestrians that are killed every year crossing the street. But we don't say, "Ooh, women don't cross the street, you could get killed." So you have to think about, what are the pressures about tampons, and it's this idea of women putting something in their vagina. It's this sort of virginity, purity taboo. And then also the idea that organic tampons are safer for you, and that's absolutely not true. Those companies have done 0 studies to back up any of their claims, and I personally think it's pretty predatory to make a claim without any backup.
So one thing I found interesting in your book was what the hymen is actually for. Do we understand?
Yeah, we do understand, just nobody wants to hear it in society. So the hymen is there to protect your vagina when you're incontinent as an infant, right? So, you're dripping urine and stool when you're an infant because, again, back in the day, nobody had diapers, right? So think about everything's wet and mushy and smushy, and you're sitting in, you're putting the baby in dirt, and so there's dirt and urine and feces. And if that gets into an infant's vagina, that will cause an intense irritant reaction. So for the first year or 2 of your life, the hymen's really quite a rigid band that protects the vaginal opening. And then as we evolve, or as we sort of mature, rather, and become continent around the age of 3, the hymen just starts to get all plastic or pliable and stretchy and takes on different shapes and forms because evolution doesn't care about it anymore. In fact, evolution cares about it going away. That's why sex isn't painful for most women when they have it the first time. If sex hurt, we wouldn't perpetuate the species. Right? So evolution is very much invested in a rigid hymen at the beginning and then a hymen that basically disappears. This idea that it would be a virginity indicator is absolutely false because 50% of teens who are sexually active still have intact hymens because it can be very stretchy. And, most women don't bleed when they have sex the first time. So this idea of bloodied sheets and pain proving that you were a virgin, that means that you had sexual trauma. I think that's a really important point to make, is that, even if you do have a little bit of bleeding from the first time you have sex, it's usually a few drops of blood. The hymen doesn't have significant blood vessels. So if you're having bloodied sheets, it's because you had sexual trauma. And I think that's a really important point that we're making. What we're saying is that it's not about virginity, it's about sexual trauma. And we're making the hymen, we're holding women accountable to something that in no way or shape or form can be a virginity indicator. And it's a horrible patriarchal construct that's incredibly harmful and shows that people have no understanding about embryology or basic biology.
Well, and traditionally the hymen has been used, as you said, to show our virginity and that kind of thing. And you see all those, old Victorian movies set in Victorian times where they are checking the sheets. But I would guess back then, if that was an issue, there would be sexual trauma. There probably wasn't foreplay, and the men and women didn't even know each other. And but this is what we're also shown on TV. It is that you're going to bleed, it's going to be painful, and so that kind of sets that myth that that's what's going to happen. And then we're not taught in school that that's different, so we watch these movies as children and adults as well, and we think that that's the reality, how our bodies are built.
Yeah, I mean, it fascinates me again that people think movies are, like it's fiction, right? So, but who drives that narrative? Who does that narrative serve? It doesn't serve women. Right.
No.
But yeah, I mean, if hymen, here's the thing: if hymens were really for marriage, why do cats have them? Why do elephants have them? Why do horses have them? Why do dogs have them? Most mammals have a hymen.
Yeah. Well, it also doesn't make sense evolutionary that we have something that's going to show that we're virgins. I'm not really sure that, evolution cared about that very much, because that's how we reproduce. Yeah.
Evolution cares about making the most babies possible, because up until very recently, more than half of them were going to die. Right? You think about how high infant mortality was. So evolution cared about getting an infant out, and if that infant survived, then the mother being able to care for it long enough to get to an age when it would be self-sufficient. That's all evolution cares about. So evolution doesn't care about marriage. I mean, marriage is actually relatively recent. If you look at our time on Earth, it was a social contract for property, to make sure property got passed along. It wasn't anything, and the funny thing about it is, if people were worried about being the father of a baby, nobody had trouble with infanticide back in the day. The Spartans threw babies off the cliff if that weren't perfect. We've imbued all these sort of patriarchal societal things into the hymen, and basically what we're doing is we're saying, unless you've had sexual trauma on your wedding night, you're not a virgin, which is absolutely just horrific. And that's really the message. So I tell people the hymen is just like baby teeth. You have it for a period of time, and it serves a biological purpose in a specific developmental phase. And then you pass through that developmental phase and you don't need it anymore. So we should be no more judging women on their virginity by their hymen than we should their baby teeth.
I definitely agree. Now, I'm sure that you and I could talk about this forever, but unfortunately we only got an hour. So can you let us know how people can get a hold of your book if they want to know more?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find my book anywhere on Amazon and brick and mortar stores. You can get links through my website, drjengunter.com. You can get links you can find me on Twitter at Dr. Jen Gunter. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Jen Gunter.
Okay, well, perfect. I want to thank you for joining me today. It was a really informative show.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Yeah, well, and so everybody, today we're talking with Dr. Jen Gunter, and her book is The Vagina Bible, which I think is an overdue book for anybody who has a vagina or who wants to know more about one. So you can pick that up anywhere. If you want more information about my story and what I went through to get back to health, you can find that on my website at dr-risk.com. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can send me an email at anantacalgary@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening today. Be sure to make today a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive. Please join Dr. Rebecca Risk again next Monday at noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel. We'll talk more next week.